Welcoming everybody to the oldest street in New York City, the Bowery, and this workshop. Owners in the Bowery Historic District can get tax credits for renovation work on their buildings. We would first like to thank the New York State Historic Preservation Office and the Preservation League of New York State for partnering in this webinar. Special thanks in particular to the Preservation League of New York for creating promotional material and handling the daunting technical aspects of this webinar. The Bowery Historic District was named to the State and National Register of Historic Places in 2013. The Bowery Alliance of Neighbors and Two Bridges Neighborhood Council sponsored the designations, but the building by building research and the writing that made it possible was the work of architectural historian Carrie Culhane, who also authored the Chinatown and Little Italy historic districts. Please welcome Carrie Culhane.
Thanks, David. I am Carrie Culhane, and I thank you all for your interest in this topic and for your stewardship of New York's historic resources. The Bowery is New York's most architecturally diverse streetscape, and unlike many historic districts that have sort of a similar look and feel, the Bowery is really unique because it's representative of 4 centuries of New York City history. These buildings are valuable resources, not just as real estate investments, as you all know, but as investments in our shared history, and historic buildings are truly irreplaceable. As a consultant on tax credit rehabilitation projects, I have seen firsthand the tremendous payback on investment in historic buildings. And as a historian, I've helped list thousands of buildings in the National Register. If every property owner were to take advantage of the credits available to them, they would collectively realize billions and actually hundreds of billions of dollars in tax credits. So I hope that some of those billions make their way into your pocket. And with that, I will turn it over to the people who will tell you how to do that. So thank you all for participating tonight, and thanks for David for hosting, and for the Bowery Alliance of Neighbors for doing all the work that they do to save the Bowery. Good night.
Thanks so much,
Thank you, Carrie.
First, I wanted to thank David and the Bowery Alliance of Neighbors for inviting the Preservation League of New York State to join on this great webinar both tonight and 2 nights ago if you were with us for the homeowner program, which was also a great program. I'm Christina Hingle, Preservation League of New York State. I do preservation policy at the League, and we travel all over the state, as you may know. I apologize if you were with us Tuesday, you've already heard my elevator speech. But we do advocacy, outreach, and provide technical services all across the state to individuals, municipalities, organizations, nonprofits, all with the goal of protecting our most precious historic resources and doing our preservation work all across the state. What I focus on mostly at the League is public policy. So I do a lot with federal, state, and local level advocating for historic preservation. So we really look to find what's missing in terms of legislation at those levels and really see how we can help be a resource to further the goals of historic preservation. Obviously, one of the things we focus on a lot is the Historic Tax Credit Program. One of the reasons we love participating in webinars like this and different programs like this is that New York State has great historic tax credit programs, and we're very lucky to have these in support of preservation here in New York. So it's really important for us to make sure that everyone knows about these wonderful programs offered by the State Historic Preservation Office. So some other things we do in our travels, we like to talk to our different colleague nonprofit groups in all the regions in New York State. It's really important to get an idea of what groups with similar goals as us have in terms of preservation and how we can all work together and be a resource for furthering preservation in New York State. One of the things we also like to do is we obviously like to celebrate the best and best for preservation projects. So through our Excellence Award program, we honor these projects on a yearly basis. We will be excited to announce in a couple months our 2020 Excellence in Preservation winners, so stay tuned for that. It's going to be really exciting to see what all these projects are going on across the state. Another thing that we like to do, as much as we wish there were not threatened resources in New York State, there are many threatened historic resources. So we do like to bring attention to those through our 7 to Save program, which is a biennial list that we hope to bring attention and to be able to advocate for the preservation of very important, irreplaceable historic sites. One of the things that's also really important here at the League is we do offer a grant program in partnership with the New York State Council on the Arts. And this is our Preserve New York grant program and our technical assistance grant program. These programs are available to nonprofits and municipalities, and we use those grants as a way to be able to support projects all across the state and have funding for reports that can inform preservation projects. Our revolving loan program is our EPIP loan program, and we're able to provide low interest loans for projects across the state as well. Here's just some information on how to reach us at the League and how to reach me. If there's anything we can help with preservation-wise, please let us know. I will also be putting in the chat feature all of your speakers' contact information, emails, and the agenda for tonight. So I'll put that up shortly, so you'll have all that in case you need to get in touch. And one thing I'll mention is at the end of this program, we'd love to do a Q&A session. So as we're going through and presenting, if you want to type in the Q&A feature your question at the very end, we can hopefully get to as many as we can and try to get those answered. One other thing to note is that we are recording this program, so it will be available on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. So if you miss anything or need to go back, that'll be there. And then with that, I will turn it over to Julian Adams, who is joining us from the State Historic Preservation Office to talk about the Commercial Historic Tax Credit Program. Yes, David?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I meant to mention earlier, if anybody would like to get the program, the brochure that we did on the tax credit program for the Bowery, just write to our website and we'll be happy to send you one.
Perfect.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Julian.
David, thank you. I got a copy of that before the workshop, before we came on. I thought it was an excellent publication. We don't usually see that kind of good publication come out ahead of time, so thank you for that. My name is Julian Adams. I am a Bureau Director in the State Historic Preservation Office. We're part of the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation in New York State. We manage all the state and federal preservation programs for the state. Under my administration or my supervision are National Register and Survey, state and federal tax credits for commercial properties, homeowners tax credits, grants for not-for-profits and municipalities, a certified local government program which ensures that our local municipalities are doing the best job they can on the local preservation legislation in their municipal laws. Also outreach and community engagement, and I always say a few other things I've forgotten from day to day. It's a lot of stuff on my plate, but it's all fun. We're going to talk tonight about the commercial tax credit. I know there was a homeowners credit workshop 2 days ago. We'll have a slide mentioning that again for a little refresher, but primarily this workshop is about the commercial tax credit, which is available for income producing buildings. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, Christina. We're going to give that a shot here. I have never done this before, so bear with me. I'm going to share a screen. That's not what I'm looking for. This one, and I am going to share that one. And I'm going to go to there. And there we go, and I am up there. Okay, good. Again, I was doing a little research on the Bowery before when I was setting this up, and it really is an amazingly diverse neighborhood. As you're saying, the oldest street in Manhattan possibly, and such incredible resources, everything from late 20th century to very early 19th century. So you have a great variety of architecture, great variety of uses here, but really a great snapshot of the history of New York City on this street is available if you walk and know what you're looking at. Now our office, the larger office we're a part of, the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, you may know us from our parks. That's our largest program at our agency, the state parks out there. We have state parks throughout Long Island and New York City. We also have Shirley Chisholm State Park. We just renamed an earlier park for Shirley Chisholm to recognize our great Black female leadership in New York State, Black history, female history. We're doing great emphasis on trying to make sure we represent diversity in our parks, and that's something we're looking for right now. Our agency is responsible for providing safe recreational and educational opportunities for all New York State New Yorkers and visitors. Also the steward of all our valuable natural, historic, and cultural resources. We have our own state historic site system spread across the state with sites you can visit, learn more about New York State history, art and architecture and culture. We also are charged in our legislation for advancing historic preservation efforts across New York State. We just undertook a new state plan, which we did a lot of interpretation, a lot of research, a lot of interviews with people throughout New York State to understand what we can do for the state to advance that process. Again, as I said, our office provides programs and services that help individuals and communities achieve the social, economic, and environmental benefits associated with historic preservation. It's very important to realize that people like to say preservation was green before green was cool. Recycling is at its best when it reuses an entire neighborhood or a single building. It's a great way to honor our past, to be sustainable in our development, and also preserve our history that's made up of these buildings. Like I said, in the Bowery, you can read the history of New York City walking down the Bowery Street. Most people are familiar with the New York State and National Register of Historic Places. That is the official list of objects, sites, neighborhoods, districts, buildings, all kinds of things such as that are important to New York State and national history. There's a way to be listed for both elements on the National Register. It's a process that we administer through a process of people contacting us about the National Register and seeing if their property is eligible for it, and moving them through the nomination process to eventually going ahead to the National Park Service going, yes, you are on the National Register. The National Register is an honorific only. It does not provide any protection for properties, but it does allow for the entry into programs such as the grants and the tax credits we're talking about tonight. You have to be listed on the National Register in some form to be as one of the eligible qualifiers for tax credit. So that's one thing we'll talk about. The tax credits for New York State are a combination of two, and these are the income producing properties. That means rental residential, it means rental retail, it means warehouse, it means factory, anything such as that you have an income from. Certain nonprofit entities are able to form limited liability corporations to also gain investors and use the credit as well. It's a little more sophisticated use of it, but it is out there. At its basis, you take 20% of your qualified rehabilitation expenditures, what you spend on rehabilitating the building. That means soft and hard costs, permitting such as that, anything that is going into the building to renovate it for its new use or continued use. You take 20% of that cost and it becomes available as a tax credit. Also, if you're in a qualifying census tract, we'll talk a little more about that in a moment, you're also eligible for the 20% New York State commercial tax credit. Now, on paper, that adds up to 40% tax credits for your properties. Now, of course, taxes have an impact on each other, New York State and federal taxes. Turns up between 35 and 40% of the tax credit back to you. The difference between a credit and a tax reduction is this literally is a credit against taxes owed on the income stream from the building, which can be very, very useful when you get your pro forma up and running on a new project or just a refreshing of your building. Again, we are a partnership program. We have our office partners with the National Park Service. They are called the mothership for the tax credit and National Register programs. There's also a combination for the credits, of course, the IRS at the federal level for their tax rules, and also New York State taxation and finance. So we partner with all of these. And I just want to actually shout out to the league there. They're our statewide nonprofit partner that we rely on an awful lot for our assistance in promoting, protecting, advancing preservation goals throughout New York State. We can only do so much as a governmental entity, and our Preservation League partners are such an important part of our work across New York State. So thank you again for hosting this and also working out the technology for this. At my age, it's a little difficult, so thank you for that, Christina. As I said earlier, is your income producing properties. Now we have a short list here: commercial, industrial, agricultural, or rental residential, and we've had all types. We have all types of those projects coming in. It is a dollar for dollar reduction, a credit back on your state and federal tax liability. And to try to make it simple, although there are two programs, we use a single review process and a single application process for those. We tried to reduce the burden of bureaucracy as much as we could in putting these programs together. I always tell people, yes, it's a bureaucratic process, there's paperwork involved. We'll go over that shortly. It's not very difficult. It's just a new thing if you haven't seen it before. Now, there are, as I mentioned, qualifiers for the state credit. Now, people being listed on the National Register can be a little confusing to people. Many people know a major building, a long building, let's like the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, Grand Central Terminal in New York City. Those are listed individually on the National Register of Places because they're large, important structures. We also have collections of historic structures, such as the Bowery, which is a very linear historic district. We also have things like the West Village. We have the parts of the Upper West Side. We have Tribeca, Wall Street. That are collections of buildings that altogether tell the story of the history of the area, the use of the area, the architectural history, the financial history, the social history, even the building history of New York City. And those can be clumped together in a grouping with a single story and be called an historic district. And in an historic district, we have buildings that are contributing and non-contributing. I think the Bowery has an enormous amount of contributing structures. That list is available from our office, and we can look it up online and go, yes, you are a contributing element, which, like I said, the Bowery is largely contributing structures to the register. Not every district survives intact. There can be a building from 1995. I always say in a small village, maybe a corner gas station where something was lost. Those might be non-contributing, but they're still in the boundary. We don't call them out in the boundary. They're still in there, and we can have that determination at the time when you call us and ask us about your structure. We also have an ability in New York City and other municipalities across the state to have what we call local certified historic districts. There's many local historic districts, you know, that the Landmarks Preservation Commission has put together. You can also have the city go through a process where we work with the National Park Service to certify that district, which basically means it's as good as National Register listing. The process it went through, everything we have about it, the documentation is about as good as a National Register district. And we can also use that certification to bring the benefits of National Register listing to those districts. So there's a couple of ways to do that. What if you're not listed yet? Well, we have a process where we can bring you into the program before you are actually listed on the register. It is for individual buildings and also entire districts where we can look at the property and go, yes, you are pretty good. We think you're good for the National Register. And there's a process you can go through to get you into the tax credit program ahead of the listing, because as we all know, documentation can take a while, and time is money, and time is of the essence in the rehab programs and restoration programs. So we have a way to bring you into earlier and worry about those documentation issues later down the line, kind of mopping up afterwards. So we actually have that available to you as well. Here's a good map of the Bowery district. Districts are very carefully considered for how they tell a story. Of course, the Bowery being a very early street and a very linear, that's what we chose to do here. Districts have to have a story of their organization, their development, their history, anything about that. We can have multiple block districts. We have entire villages in New York State on the National Register because they developed as an Erie Canal Village or other things. We have industrial areas or cultural areas. But here at the Bowery, the story is really that linear district, that whole street there that is served as a major thoroughfare, commercial, residential, and thus light industry throughout New York City's history. And that's why that's shaped like that. And you probably, if you're looking on there, probably can capture or find where you are in there. You know where you are. And this map, the blue is what we consider contributing to the district. So you can see there's an enormous amount of blue versus the clear, which means non-contributing to the district. One thing that people always get hung up on, and this is a math, I was a liberal arts major, so bear with me, is that one of the other qualifiers, in addition to listing on the register, is you have to be undertaking a substantial rehabilitation. We'll talk about what rehabilitation means in a moment. It is literally not a restoration. It's a way of using the building for existing use or also finding a new use that does not ruin historic character. And one other qualifier is that substantial rehabilitation test the IRS looks for. Remember, we partnership not only with the National Park Service, but also the Internal Revenue Service, so they have rules as well. Substantial rehabilitation is a key that when they want to make sure that you're doing enough in the building that qualifies for the credit. In essence, not painting a building, not changing the door out, Those are things that might qualify for the homeowner's credit. With the commercial credit, they want a substantial investment in the building. The easiest calculation you can do is take the value of the property and minus the value of the land. If you could pick the building up like it was a Lego building, pop it off the land, you have the building in your hand. And then if you owned it for a while, you take any depreciation away. And if you put any capital improvements in your ownership, you add that back. And that is considered the adjusted basis value. The National Park Service, if you were able to Google NPS, which is National Park Service, comma, TPS, which stands for Technical Preservation Services, you'll go to that site and they have a link to the tax credits that give you a lot more information on that, plus an IRS link for that. I recommend you look at that. Also have your tax attorney, your lawyer, your accountant look at that as well, because it's not our part of the program, but we need to make sure you understand it and have the access to resources to understand that. In essence, you need to put enough money into the building as it's worth, minus the land, minus depreciation, and plus any capital improvements you've taken in your ownership. The New York State commercial credit, again, piggybacks on the federal. The first qualifier is that if you get the federal credit, you get the state credit. You have to be located in what we call an eligible census tract. When the legislation was passed, the state assemblymen and senators and governor wanted to make sure it was directed at areas that needed that assistance, needed that boost in investment, where other things might not bring it in there. We have available on our website, if you look up your address on our CRIS system, our CRIS system on our state preservation website, you can actually find that layer in our maps and turn it on. The other thing is to email or call us, and we have our contact information at the end of this presentation. That's easier for us to do it. We do it a lot. We can certainly help you out with that. There are review fees, both at the federal level and the state level. They're very insignificant compared to the value of the project. It's just make sure that we actually have a way to track you and say, yes, this person's gone through the process, they've paid their fees, and we can certify from the credit. The federal credit has no cap. If you have 20%, if you were to do a $100 million rehabilitation, which is not out of the question in New York City, you could be eligible for up to a $20 million tax credit from the federal government. There is no cap on that credit. However, the state credit was capped at $5 million. So we do have difference in there. We have quite a few projects under that amount of money, not up to the $5 million cap, but just be aware of that there is a difference in how much you can claim in the credit based on your cost of rehabilitation. Okay. I told you we're going to rehash a teeny bit about the homeowners credit there, because we do have homeowners and also condo situations in New York City. For the homeowners credit, it is 20% again, just like our state credit for the commercial. You must own and live in the house. It cannot be a rental property. The total project cost must exceed $5,000. At least 5% of that must be spent at the exterior of the building or home. And that really doesn't add up to a lot for the $5,000. The reason for that is that it is a public benefit program. The state wanted to make sure there was something at the exterior of the building that showed, look what we've done and how we've helped these people. One thing is you have to have that work approved by our office before you begin, which is very important. You must be located again in the eligible census tract, just like for the state commercial credit. For certain eligible incomes, the refund credit is refundable as a check on your taxes. It's not only a tax deduction, it's all a tax credit. It can also be refundable to you as a check. Again, this is a great 20,000-foot overview, and I ask you to look at the end of our connection at the end. Contact Christina or David at the end of our presentation, or a little in the future, we can get you more information on it. We always say there's a checklist to start with. David, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that Dan McEnany of the State Historic Preservation Office actually looked into the census tract. So one piece of good news is that almost every bit of the Bowery, except a little bit of it in the Cooper Square area, is eligible for, for these tax credit programs as far as the census tract goes.
That's great news and timely. Thank you for that, David. I was actually wondering that in my head, so thank you for bringing that up. That's great information.
Sure.
Like anything else, the tax credit is a process we have to go through, and we try to help people through it, saying, okay, how can you start, and give a checklist. The first, of course, is, are you working with a building that is listed individually or located in a local district, locally certified district, or talking to our office, is the building eligible for listing or in the process of listing? That's number one. Number two, does it pass that substantial rehabilitation test? Does it meet enough in its dollar amount you're putting in the building to be also qualified? Finally, is your building in an eligible census tract? Just as David said, most of the Bowery is, so that is a good point for us. That's a moot point for us, so we can have that. We can look at the map with you if you reach out to us and show you where you are and where you aren't. We always say, contact us early before work begins. Please do that. If you have started work and you go, oh my goodness, I didn't know about this credit, it's something we can talk with you and help you out a bit through there. We have a lot of projects coming part way through, and we can say, hey, can we get you into the program now? We'll be very honest if something is happening where we can't get you into the program, but don't think because you started work right now on commercial projects you're entirely out. Talk to us first. We also say that your project is complex. Please consult with experts. There's a great deal of tax-ready consultants in New York City. You can reach out to the Landmark Preservation Commission or the Preservation League to see who may be available in the area. We can't recommend people, but our nonprofits can. So hopefully Christina can help you with that. It is a three-part program, three-part application, and we have things such as part one. I always say it's cleverly named as a three-part application, part one. Again, part one says, am I eligible as an historic building? You have the buildings in historic districts, individual listed buildings, and also buildings to be listed. Part one is necessary in the historic districts and also in your the buildings yet to be listed. The individual listed buildings, we already have a good documentation of those. We move right to the part two. The goal is to make sure the Park Service understands that from the time of listing, which could be in 40 years ago, to now, the building still contributes to the district, because we know buildings have a lot of changes sometimes. So the part one says, yes, I'm still historic, I still. Part two is, I call the heart and soul of the application. It really is a matter of having a good snapshot of the building's conditions and a proposal of what's going to happen. The narrative is one part of it, also photographs, plans and elevation drawings are necessary. The narrative describes existing conditions, including major building features and materials. It really is like a call. This is what I have, this is what I want to do. This is what I have, this is what I want to do. I tell people to break it down very simply as masonry, windows, roofing, doors, plaster, trim, staircases, things such as that. It's accompanied by photographs to document all areas of the property that needs to be keyed to a floor plan. If you are doing any demolition and new construction, that needs to be illustrated as well in those drawings. If you're looking to put something historic back, a missing cornice, a missing porch, anything such as that, or put new windows in and you're trying to match what's old, we do need to start photographs because we want to make sure that the building is getting the right treatment and not being moved in another direction from its historic character. How do we review these properties and these projects? We don't make it up when we go. We don't say, I like that, I don't like that. We use the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which are put together by the Park Service. Again, the rehabilitation is an important word there. It is not restoration. It is a way that we look at how can we keep this building alive in 2020 and beyond, even though it may have had some changes or some decay or some issues. They are available online. Again, if you look at the National Park Service Technical Preservation Services site, they have an entire good link in there, illustrated guidelines, as well as tech notes and little games you can play to learn more about them. What's the basic things, the standards? There are 10 of them, but I always break them down to a couple of key concepts. The one is preserve historic material. If you've got something historic, try to keep it. I look at that as the 3 R's as well. You repair it if you've got it. If it is so deteriorated, you retain it first. You retain it first if you've got it. If there's damage, you repair it. And if has damage that's beyond repair, can we find to replace it in a way that matches the old design, color, texture, overall visual quality and materials? We do allow for substitute materials in certain situations, but that's something to talk to us about because we may know some sources that you don't know. We may have some also ideas that you may say, they won't let us do that. Try us. We may talk to you about it. That's the preserve historic material. Distinctive features. Remember, buildings have their own faces, their own personalities. We want to make sure in the rehabilitation those aren't done away with. We look for things such as methods of construction, craftsmanship, details, elements such as that. So we do have that in our standards there. This is a building in Kingston that has quite a bit of detail on the outside. It has shingles, it has half tempering clapboards, it has multi-pane windows, it has these X's up there, I'm not sure what they are. And this was all retained in the rehabilitation because this is part of the character we look at. You'd look at things like window hoods, door surrounds, cornices, your brick patterning, materials on the exterior, as also on the interior. One thing we always have to stress is that the local Landmarks Preservation Commission looks at the exterior of a building primarily. We look at the interior and the exterior. And that goes to the next point. Floor plans are important to us. We look at the major circulation patterns. Are there anything about staircases, hallways? How do you get through the building? We want to make sure that when you walk into the building, you understand the plan, because the plan many times speaks to the original use of the structure. Important interior spaces are also very important to retain. Of course, this is a former church in Buffalo that's been turned into an event space, wedding venue, conference center, and they retain the open space there. We also look at things such as, let's say, a convent, small chapels. We look at theater interiors. We look at music halls, opera houses, anything that has a major space that speaks to the original function of that building and may typically have quite a bit of detail. We look for that to be retained. There may be some flexibility in what we do in there, but it's something to always think of, that you don't walk into this kind of space and assume you can do whatever you want in there. That's something to talk to us about. Windows are always a big issue. Windows are very important to the National Park Service. They are considered extremely character-defining features in historic buildings, their material, their orientation, their location. So we have to be very careful about windows. They also look to stress at the Park Service level that you repair historic windows as much as possible. If they have to be replaced, they want to make sure you have as much documentation of why as possible, because those windows do reflect technology, they reflect usage, they reflect a lot of character, and windows were typically designed with the building to show a certain face to the world. What we call sustainable development, and also energy efficiency. The Park Service has put out a fairly new guideline on this sustainable development. Looking at how can we use these historic buildings to also deal with energy issues. Now, the two things people think of is many of these buildings were built in the time of cheap energy, but don't forget, people also had their buildings as passive climactic machines with good ventilation, good lighting, good air circulation. And I always tell people these buildings were built as machines, and we've forgotten how to pull the levers. One thing is not to work against your building, work with the natural green elements of your building, but also think about how we can add new technology, including green roofs, including geothermal, including solar panels. We're doing an enormous amount of solar work in Brooklyn right now, trying to make as many solar panels on the row house neighborhoods as possible. So it's something that we allow. Just talk to us about it and figure out how the best it can be done. We are aware of the code issues because buildings were built many times before codes. We have things as access, we have fire safety, we have use issues, separations of uses, and also accessibility under the Americans with Disabilities Act. We work with people to design those into the building so they are done appropriately in the right locations, in the right design, without ruining the effect of the building. More keys to our project. We always say that call us first, we can help you out. We can help you identify the character-defining elements of the building, and then we can help you also convey those to your architect and contractor so they not walk in thinking they have a free hand, do what they want. Now, we also have in that process, when you do the part 2, you get an approval for that. And that's kind of like the work contract between our office and you and the National Park Service. If you have any project changes, as we know, you open up a wall, you open up a ceiling, and you find things you didn't expect, or material crumbles you didn't expect to crumble, talk to us. You can amend the project application to keep us all on track and aware of those changes. Again, keep the standards in mind. Refer to the illustrated guidelines for interpreting the standards bulletins, again, on that National Park Service site. And again, for large and complicated projects, you may want to talk to an architect, preservation consultant, accountant, attorney, banker, anybody that knows the program and can help you with it. Again, our nonprofit partners can help you with finding that kind of person to help you with your project. We also, I always like to stress that you've already paid our salary for taxes, so we can be your first line of consultation in that way and help you out through a lot of it. Now, when all is done, what do? You turn into part 3. The part 3 is essentially, this is what I did. And if you did what you said you were going to do, you're perfectly in like Flynn. The project must be completed, all the paint must be done, the nails must be done, everything must be done. We document that in a simple format, a photograph and a couple of pieces of paper, send it to the Park Service. If they like it, they'll sign off on it, and then we can sign off also on the state credit. That's usually the easiest part of the application if you've done everything right. A couple of potential pitfalls, proceeding with work before the Part 2 is approved. There's actually language in the law that set up the credit that said if you do that, you're at your own risk. Not notifying us of project changes. We may tell you it's no big deal. We'd like to tell you that before you go ahead and do it. We'd like to say, is that a big deal or do we need to get an amendment on it? Also, remember, we are separate from local government. We're separate from other governments down there, municipal governments and neighborhood governments. Any of those local reviews and approvals does not equal approval by us. We get people all the time going, well, Landmarks Preservation Commission approved it. Separate process, so it's a program. So we need to have all those in order together. What can get you in trouble? If you don't have good documentation before you start work, because we have to understand what was there before we can understand what you're going to do or what you've done. Completing work that does not meet the standards or talking to us before you begin. We do have situations where the use is just too intense for the building. The first standard of the 10 standards says use the building for its original use or use does not require significant alterations or character defining features. And that is where you're just trying to put too much into a building for its original design or form. Also, we talk about substantial interior demolition. We need to understand your conditions. We do have buildings that have nothing historic on the inside. We have a lot of freedom there. But we do walk into a lot of buildings that have quite the circulation patterns, significant rooms, details and features there. And we need to have those in place and shown in Part 2. Again, we talked about the online technical resources. The National Park Service has great briefs. They have a whole website for the National Historic Preservation Tax Incentives. The preservation briefs can be just fun reading sometimes. They have all online for downloading or just reading online or printing. They actually are very good and you can learn a lot about buildings, and they're written very simply with good illustrations, photographs showing the issues. Also, they have tech notes, which are more specified for little tiny pieces of a project, such as stained glass and terracotta and mosaic floors. Boy, I moved pretty quickly. I'm proud of myself. This is our contact information here at the end. You can snap this if you want to on your computer or write it down. Again, it's not, if you also Google us, the Division for Historic Preservation in the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. Or more simply, you can Google NYSHPO. That stands for New York State Historic Preservation Office, which is one of our names. We have several of them. That's one of our names under federal programs, and that'll get you to us very quickly on Google. So, Christina, I think I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay,
Julian, thank you so much for that great overview. I mean, I'm sure I'm probably not the only one that feels overwhelmed. I know this program can seem overwhelming to people.
I felt overwhelmed for the first 2 years I worked at SHPO. So.
Okay, good. As long as we're all in the same boat, you do make it sound like so easy. So I just want to encourage folks to not be discouraged and, you know, just
the entire team to help you through every step of the way. I always say, don't call with anything you think is a silly question or a stupid question. Trust me, I've asked the same questions. So our entire goal is to help you out. I tell my staff we're public servants, we take it seriously. We'll call you, we'll tell you the best information we have. If for some reason it's not going to work, we're not going to drag you through a process that won't work for you. We'll tell you right, yes or no. We do site visits. We're back out on the road again after being kind of sequestered for a while. We're back out on the road when we can be. So if a site visit is in order or feel necessary, we could probably help you with that as well.
Wonderful. So if you guys have questions, just remember to enter them in the Q&A. I think there's one in there, Julian, if you want to take a look.
I'm trying to find it here. I don't have a question. Hold on. I don't see one. Do you see one? Oh, hold on. Let me get that Q&A. Sorry, I was picturing the wrong thing. Sorry.
No worries.
Got it. I'm still learning all these programs. Okay. My partners and I reside in an 1887 loft building, mixed use, which has a commercial unit on the ground floor. We all own our own lofts and also shares the commercial unit. Interesting. Are we eligible for tax credits if the rehab the facade, including some of the store interior? You do have the ability to mix the credits. You can take homeowners, which would be for your ownership units, as well as commercial for your commercial unit. We do have those. You prorate the information, you prorate the dollars out for each piece of that. Again, we'd have to go through some calculations on meeting the adjusted basis for the entire property. but it sounds like a possibility. It's something we would talk about, and that's from Michelle. Michelle, I believe you pronounced it correctly. You can reach out to us at the office contact we gave, and we can go from there and help you out on putting that together. It's not the simplest project, but people we have talked to, we've been able to do that mix of programs and mix of credits. Hope that helps. Okay. Anything else, David? Anybody want any question? Anything I didn't say clearly or too fast? What would you like to know?
Julian, could you talk a little bit more about cornices? And in particular, I mention that because there are a number of contributing buildings in the Bowery Historic District that many years ago, I guess, lost their cornices. And that's something that I think just very quickly, you know, really enhances the historic character of the Bowery Historic District.
Certainly. I always say they're missing their hat many times. The hat was very important part of their ensemble, what they were wearing. There was a huge move, probably starting in the 1960s or so, where buildings that had a great deal of deferred maintenance and cornices could actually be in danger of falling off. So there was an enormous move in New York City to remove them if they were looking dangerous. Sometimes people just removed them to get rid of the maintenance of them or not to worry about them. But it really is an important missing feature of the building. Cornices can come in many materials. They can be built out of brick. They can be terracotta, which is of course the baked earth. You look at a flower pot, or glazed or unglazed. It can also be a pressed metal, which was more common, a very simple pressed metal cornice. In a tax credit program, you're not required to restore. That's the key. If you're missing an element, you're not required to put it back. If you want to put it back, you'll make us very happy, of course, because that's a great thing to do. And we want to make sure is what you put back is appropriate to the building. That's why historic photographs are very important in looking at the application. We have two paths we can go that way. You either can put the historic cornice back in exact detail, as shown in historic photographs, or sometimes you can find profiles on the building itself. And those patterns were pretty common. They're ordered out of catalogs. Very rarely were they custom designed. They were entire sheet metal and cast iron catalogs. And you'd be surprised how many companies still make those today. You may be able to find your cornice, make it up out of pieces found in those modern catalogs. You can also look at something such as a substitute material, such as a fiberglass, or anything such as that, put that back up. Fiberglass has a benefit of being longer lived as long as it has a UV protector in it, and also is much lighter and easier to install than the metal. If you cannot find documentation of the cornice itself, we can talk about, okay, what's an appropriate scale here? What's an appropriate general outline? We don't want to put a faked up historic cornice there that didn't exist on the building. We can find one that may be a simplified version of the cornice that we know of that building to at least put that element back up without putting something that's fake up there. So we have two ways of going. We can put it back exactly as it was if there's documentation, or we can put it back a version of the cornice that is somewhat simplified to represent that it's modern. Not a modern looking cornice, but something that is more simplified. And again, the material, we can look at the original material, we can look at substitute materials as well. But the thing to remember is you don't have to put the cornice back on if you don't want to. It's missing and we accept the building as contributing as it is, however we like it. I know we talked about costs there for a while. There were some conversations back and forth, David, about costs. I always say that every building is a little different. Every cornice is a little different. Buildings are wider, the cornices are taller. But David, you had talked with some consultants and architects. You had a general ballpark out there you'd found?
Yes, I spoke to two different preservation architects, and they said that the cost could be somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000 for sheet metal cornices, including the installation, and that it could be less expensive if some of the cheaper materials, such as fiberglass, were used.
Yeah.
But the really interesting thing as far as the value of the building is in many cases the cornice, just as you said, it's like, you know, a person walking down the street without a hat versus with a hat. It can really just, bring out the character of the
Yeah.
building in a really dramatic way. And I think a lot of the commercial properties that come in, the businesses, restaurants, stores, and whatever, they love it when a building has, a much more well-rounded, historic character to it.
Right. Exactly. One thing I'd also like to address are storefronts, because many of these buildings are mixed use. And as Michelle asked, they have a commercial tenant on the first floor. Storefronts, most buildings on the Bowery might have been built with storefronts. Some of the earlier ones we know weren't built with storefronts, but they had ones put in later when the first floor became more commercial. That's not unusual in streets that started residential and became commercial. You have earlier buildings that got storefronts, or buildings that were built with storefronts where it was more commercial venue there. Storefronts can change. People love to update those commercial spaces. They love to make it look more modern, more attractive. Remember, tastes change, styles change. People try to keep their building and their storefront looking very good. They don't look old-fashioned. We find some buildings that have the original storefronts, and we love those. Or if they have a piece of one, we can find and use that as a model for the rest of it. But most buildings very rarely have the original storefronts. So again, you don't have to put the original storefront back. You can keep what you have. If you want to put the original storefront back, again, we go to that documentation. What can you find in the building? Sometimes if it's a cast iron facade, a cast iron storefront, we can find one pilaster in one corner or something. We can find a scar on the ceiling to show us where the shape was. And that way we can work backwards from that documentation. There also is that amazing archive of photographs of New York City from the 1940s and 30s. It's available in the archives building. LPC uses them in research object as we do as well. There was an effort made to take a photograph of every building in New York City in the 1930s and 40s, and it's an amazing archive. You can find some original details that are missing now. You can find things were done at that time. Anything like that helps us understand. If we have a storefront from 1987 that's just falling apart and we can't find any documentation of the original, we can help you design a storefront that's appropriate for your building and looks maybe a little better than it was stuck in there in the 80s. We do that quite a bit. I want to talk about windows again. Windows cannot be overly stressed.
Julian?
Yes, go ahead.
Julian? I'm sorry. I just wanted to interject. The Bowery Alliance of Neighbors actually has a pretty large file of photographs, historic photographs of the Bowery, some of them going back to the late 1800s. So just go to our website, contact us, and we'll look up your address. And if we have anything, we would love to send it to you.
You're better than the LPC archives. Thank you. I like that.
Great resource. Definitely great resource.
Great one. Windows are so important. One thing we do find in New York City is windows get replaced and replaced and replaced and replaced. So it's not unusual. We do have an understanding that older windows can actually deteriorate if not maintained. A well-maintained historic window can last quite some time. If you have original windows in repairable condition, we are perfectly fine with weatherizing them through interior or exterior storms. Some windows can accept a piggyback glass within the sash itself. The most important thing to remember about windows is the glass itself can only get so energy efficient. It's really about providing that weather break that a storm can do for you. It's also for making sure that no leaks are happening around the edges of the window, around the trim, that the weeding rails align properly and are sealed. Wind does not come through glass. It comes through openings in the window that can be easily sealed up. The glass itself, again, any amount of that fancy sealed unit will only get you so far towards keeping the cold out. It really is the air infiltration around the window, and you can achieve just as good a quality with a good quality interior or exterior storm. If you have a window that is entirely falling apart, but it is a historic window, we want to make sure that any new window that goes back looks very much like that window. We can also go from a single pane edit situation to a double pane window as long as it looks right, has the right configuration and the right appearance and fits in the opening properly. If you're missing historic windows and you really want to say, hey, these windows don't look very good, we want to dress our face back up like putting the cornice or a storefront on, then we do look back to say, okay, what windows were there? What historic windows were there? Can we find a good replacement for that window that recreates that appearance? But again, we can look at sometimes even substitute materials, and we can look at definitely energy efficient new units at that time. Like with anything, if you can prove that the material or the feature is either gone or deteriorated beyond repair, Then we can talk about new materials, new features there that have the similar appearance. We're not stuck in the past. We understand that things have to move forward sometimes, particularly if the originals are gone. Okay. Fire safety, we understand fire safety. We understand loading. We understand separation. But always talk to us, because what a contractor, an architect, or an engineer might want to do is not exactly right for the program. We don't believe we add costs to projects. We also we believe sometimes we can find ways to actually save your money to do the equivalent level of safety or egress or repair that actually is about retaining what you have rather than ripping out and starting over, which can get very pricey sometimes. Okay.
All great points, Julian. Particularly with the window, I feel like preservationists are going to be fighting that misnomer that, you know, new vinyl replacement windows are much more air efficient, you know, to the day we die.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's going to be in my tombstone, actually. No vinyl windows, right on my tombstone. It is a matter of, we have an enormous amount of window products out there. With the energy crisis started in the 70s and even to now, windows were seen as the big culprit, and they have issues with historic windows, but it's an easy retrofit or an easy solution, not throwing them away. One of the big tragedies of historic preservation we've seen, I've been in the office 32 years, is that a lot of wonderful old growth lumber in repairable condition went to the landfill. Things either made with beautiful machinery from the 20s and 30s, even the 40s, things were handmade earlier than that, that really had great quality, had a lot more years of life in them, could have been kept and weatherized appropriately, but they all went to the landfill, which is, we don't have that old growth lumber easily on hand anymore. Or even you have a wonderful steel window that is a beautiful piece of machinery. Those things are made like machines. Again, can be appropriately retrofitted. So again, talk to us. We maybe have a solution for you. Don't sign any contracts on your work before you talk to us and get the program underway and the application started, because you can sign away in good faith out of the goodness of your heart, trying to do what you think is the right thing for the building and thwart your ability to get the credit.
Julian, I'm seeing a follow-up from Michelle on the Q&A.
Good.
I'm not sure if it's an additional
I got
question
it.
or
Let me
if
see it.
it's a comment.
Okay, I got it again. Our storefront is original. Good. That's great to hear. I believe at least the same for the last 50 years. Again, that would be historic. We look at the 50-year window. Is it historic from 50 years ago? You have the photograph from the 40s. However, the elevated train structure forced the photographer to shoot not straight on, but at a side angle. That's our bane. Let me tell you, those angled photographs where we can't see something, we could turn them, look at them a little differently. That's good news. It's something we'd certainly love to talk to you about. Look at the photograph and kind of look at the existing storefront and piece it together. One thing that we do in our office is we look at a lot of pictures. We confer a lot, we see a lot. I don't want to say we have a trained eye, that sounds a little too pompous, but we do have a great deal of experience in piecing those stories together from photographs and existing conditions. And it's also fun for us, so we'd love to help you out with that if we can, Michelle.
Any parting notes, Julian? That we covered a lot today.
Oh, we did. I'm gonna need a drink after this. I held off before after. I was good about that.
That's fair.
What I would say is, if you're even thinking about a project, or if you have an inkling of an idea, call us, contact us, email us, because again, we can go to your building, see what we have on file, talk to you about it, talk about your program, see if it's a good fit. If you're underway in a commercial program, if you're already doing some work, catch your breath, call us. We will see if we can help you out and bring you into the program. There's been quite a bit of projects that have come in underway, and as long as something catastrophic hasn't happened, we can certainly pull it out of the fire. Give you an idea of the commercial program in New York State. We are $1 in the country for commercial tax credits. We have been for the last 5 or 6 years. We typically run between $900 million and $1 billion of projects a year. What's interesting for fiscal year 2020 is we actually have one project that's $1 billion. So we're going to go way up this year. And that's the Farley Post Office project being turned into the new Penn Station. So that one is an exciting project. We do projects of all sizes. I've done mom and pop stores with one apartment above and a commercial below in Crossroads in central New York. I've done things like the Empire State Building and Grand Central Terminal. So we do all scale of projects. Everyone is different, everyone is interesting, everyone is fun for us, because we're helping put these buildings either back to use or keep them in use to make sure that it's good sustainable development, good historic development to maintain the character of our neighborhoods and our cities. And hopefully working with the Bowery neighborhood, we'll have a great way to keep the character of that thoroughfare intact for the next several years.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what projects come out of the Bowery.
too.
And I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and particularly David from the Bowery Alliance of Neighbors for having both the SHPO and the Preservation League join on these incredibly useful webinars this week. I think we've all learned a lot, and we're definitely really excited about all the enthusiasm, David, you and your organization have down there. And my hat's off to Julian and all the staff at SHPO. They're really the boots on the ground for this stuff. And, you know, they're doing God's work, I should say, but they are amazing and have limited resources. And, you know, obviously with this pandemic, we're all facing a myriad of challenges. So I really just appreciate how well the organization, the agency is able to pull together to get this stuff done. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, David. Thank you, Christine.
And we appreciate all of you guys for helping us with this. We just could not have done it without you guys. And also anybody, in addition to the photographs, anybody that's looking for research on their building, we can certainly get anything that we have on hand, including the National Register write-up on your particular building. And in fact, the entire National Register of Historic Places is accessible on our website, BoweryAlliance.org. And we just hope that some of the participants tonight do indeed follow up with Julian and get something going as far as renovation work.
Absolutely. Good.
Great. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us.
Thank
Have a
you.
great night. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.